Everything seemed to get more expensive in the Netherlands, Amsterdam being its own demon. Worryingly enough, the price of oil was risen high due to the Hormuz Strait being closed off. Dutch households pay on average €30 more, bringing our household gas costs up to €268, with unemployment set to rise. Daily costs and multiple wars affecting supply chains, consumers are changing their spending habits. And who is to thank for these future costs and current costs? As a great superpower goes through its golden age, the decrepit leader is trying to drag us all into a death war, and Iran has shown that it's ready to stand to the death. You can find an Iranian official commenting here.
Because Donald Trump had been deceiving others and not keeping with his promises. And we experienced it in 2 times of negotiations, that while we were engaged in negotiation, they struck us.
Do you consider this an existential threat to the Islamic Republic?
It is an existential threat to the Islamic Republic, and therefore we have to stay with full might. The proof is in the pudding. What is important for us is the end of this game.
Now, Iran has struck back at the world from down in the F-35s. These planes are at a cost of $82 million. And also the hit at the Ras Laffan LNG plant, a Qatari LNG plant. Now, a lot of Middle Eastern players are reconsidering their infrastructure strikes on Iran solely due to this bomb, following the attack on the Ras Laffan site within Qatar. Now, the Qatari site exports. Qatar as a nation exports 1/3 of the world's helium. Now, it's a byproduct of liquid natural gas production. The semiconductor industry is the largest consumer of helium, and the Ras Laffan site has been reported to account for 1/5 of global supply. Israel indicates that they would hold off on future strikes against Iranian infrastructure in the meanwhile, easing concerns after the largest day of attacks on energy assets since the conflict began, including severe damage to the Ras Laffan site. What does this mean for consumers? What does this mean for consumers worldwide? 4-day work weeks are supposedly being introduced in countries across Asia and, of course, oceanic countries such as Australia. Businesses are trying to get fuel costs down, as United Airlines is planning for high oil costs in the future. A lot of countries are also bracing for change. We might even see change going back to how businesses and nations were acting during COVID. Now, here in the Netherlands, we wait for the politicians to come off the weekend and hopefully discuss us plebeians whilst we have barbecues and croquettes at a lovely wee terrace, just maybe. However, the Australian situation illustrates a supply chain dynamic getting lost in the Hormuz. Australia imports roughly 90% of its transport fuel, primarily refined products from Asian refineries, rather than Gulf crude direct. These refineries, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, they process the Gulf crude and they ship the finished product back to Australia. Australian ships negotiate Hormuz transit permission. The effective chain is Gulf crude, Asian refinery, refined product, back to Australia. A disruption anywhere propagates downstream. The friendly pass that Japan or Australia might secure doesn't solve refinery throughput problems if crude supply to those refineries is irregular. The work from home message also implicitly acknowledging how thin Australia's fuel buffer is. Generally countries have a 90-day stock holding target. This is more true in developed economies, and it's something that Australia has historically underperformed on. The disruption doesn't need to be a total bite. A sustained 20 to 30% reduction in throughput for weeks is enough to cause rationing cascades in a country with that thin a buffer and that much geographic dependence on road transport. We're seeing how a lot of countries are now moving to a model of just in time rather than a 90-day buffer of any sort. Now, the just in time procurement model in oil and gas does require precisely timed imports to meet the demand. It does reduce storage costs and improves the short-term efficiency, but significantly increases vulnerability to external shocks and disruptions such as geopolitical conflicts. We're seeing it now, and we're also seeing it in the 2022 start of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Now, it can rapidly translate into shortages, price spikes, and energy insecurity. Without the strategic reserves or diversified supply resources, countries operating on GIT principles may face cascading economic effects, inflation, industrial slowdowns, and of course, pressure on households. And what does that mean for most households? Well, my one piece of advice: get an e-bike.